The rock in space. The cold vacuum of space surrounds us. It's a strange feeling, this emptiness that never ends. Out here, no one can hear you scream. But I didn't need to scream. My heart was pounding in my chest, though I didn't know if it was because of the thrill of space or the absolute isolation that we were surrounded by. All I knew was that space felt infinite, like an unyielding black canvas stretching beyond comprehension. I was floating in my exosuit, just outside the ship, as we scoured the wreckage of a once mighty museum ship. It was a detour, not part of the plan, but salvage like this was the best way to make some quick funds. The museum ship had been abandoned long ago, left to drift in the vast nothingness after an unexplained disaster. Our mission was simple: find whatever valuable relics we could and get out of here before the wreckage completely fell apart. The hull was a mess of twisted metal and brittle remnants, pieces that didn't belong to a museum, but to the trash heap of forgotten history. Space was littered with it: wrecks of ships, forgotten colonies, and broken artifacts drifting endlessly. The museum ship had met its untimely end when an unknown force had torn it apart. What we found floating around it was the aftermath: shards of once proud objects and discarded remnants of cultural heritage. Paint was ahead of me, already drifting through the wreckage, her exosuit a blur as she tossed around pieces of broken materials and detritus. She was in her element, moving with the kind of precision that I couldn't quite match, always quick to find something of interest. "Looks like they cleared out the good stuff already," she remarked over the comms, her voice slightly amused, but tinged with a frustration I understood. She swatted aside a floating piece of debris with her tail, her movements almost playful despite the dire nature of our mission. I had to smile at the thought. She looked like a little space-suited dinosaur, her tiny frame whizzing around effortlessly. "You're probably right," I replied, glancing at my visor, the reflection of distant stars dancing across the glass. Space was beautiful, almost too beautiful. Yet, all I could think about was the emptiness of it, the vastness that seemed to suffocate every living thing. "Hey, Cap," Paint called. "Do you think we're going to find anything good in this junkyard?" Captain Sunlight's voice crackled through the comms. "Keep looking, crew. Maybe there's something valuable hiding in the mess. Scrap metal, tech, or maybe something worth more. Anything we can sell." "Sure thing," I muttered, floating slowly in the direction of an untouched pile of debris. A few other crew members had drifted further ahead, and I was left to pick through whatever remained. I kept my eyes open for anything that might resemble valuable salvage, but everything just looked like trash. The ship had been plundered for anything of importance long before we arrived. As I hovered in front of a large twisted pile of debris, I tried to focus, pushing aside the nagging thoughts of space's emptiness, but then something caught my eye. A rock. It wasn't large, no bigger than a human fist. It drifted aimlessly near the debris, like it had been tossed here, forgotten. I couldn't help myself. I reached out with my gloved hand, my fingers wrapping around it as I pulled it closer to my helmet. It was oddly smooth, with a gray-white color and a strange pattern. A divot, an imprint, marked the surface, and when I turned it over, the texture was unlike anything I'd seen before. It didn't appear to be a meteorite or anything naturally formed from space. It looked almost too perfect. A relic. I felt my heartbeat quicken as I studied the rock. I was floating here, in the midst of a dead wreckage, far from any human civilization, and I'd just found a rock. But there was something off about it. Something that didn't belong. "What do you think of this?" I asked over the comms, lifting it so Paint could get a better look. Her voice came back in a matter of seconds. "What is it? A meteorite?" "No," I replied, shaking my head. "Doesn't look like one. It's smooth, too smooth. It's almost like something deliberately shaped it." Paint jetted over toward me, her form turning gracefully as she moved. "Is that a rock from Earth?" I examined it again, turning it slowly in my hand. "Could be," I said, though I wasn't so sure. "It looks man-made, But what's it doing here, floating around in space like this? There was a quiet moment as we both stared at the rock. Space was full of mysterious objects, wrecks, abandoned ships, and forgotten technology. But this rock felt different. It had a purpose, a presence, even in the silence of space. "Maybe it's just a rock," Paint said with a shrug, though her tone was curious. "A strange little trinket, maybe," I muttered, still not convinced. "But why would someone throw this out in the middle of space? And why is it so perfectly smooth?" The idea nagged at me, and I felt a strange energy emanating from the rock. I wasn't sure what to think, but something told me that this was no ordinary piece of junk floating in the void. It felt purposeful, like it had been left here for us to find. Paint hovered in front of me, glancing between the rock and the mess around us. "Well, if it's not a meteorite, then what is it?" I paused, wondering the same thing. I held it closer to my visor. The divot in the rock still called to me, like a hidden message waiting to be uncovered. Before I could respond, the captain's voice came through again. "Team, I want everyone back on board. We're getting ready to leave. Any interesting finds?" I glanced at the rock once more. Something told me it was more than just junk, but now wasn't the time to dwell on it. I had a job to do, and the ship was waiting for me. "Yeah," I said quietly, "we found something, but I think we need to keep looking." I turned off my thrusters and made my way back to the ship, the rock securely in my grasp, the question swirling in my mind. What was it, and why had it been left here? One thing was for sure, we hadn't come here just for trash. We'd come for something more. And I had a feeling the rock was just the beginning. The rock's mystery. As we docked back with the ship, the feeling of unease continued to gnaw at me. The ship, our floating sanctuary, seemed all the more suffocating as I carried the rock with me. It was small, unassuming in size, but it felt strangely heavy in my hands, like a piece of history that was meant to stay buried. Like it had a secret it was begging to tell, but it just couldn't yet. Paint followed me inside, still grinning with her usual easy confidence. "You think it's from Earth?" she asked as I set the rock down on the cargo holds table, but her voice lacked her usual enthusiasm. I wasn't sure if it was because of the rock, or if it was because we were both still processing the wreckage we'd seen out there, the silent remains of a civilization that had been torn apart. "I don't know," I replied, my fingers hovering over the rock's surface, tracing the divot with my gloved fingertips. "But it feels important, like it's been placed here for a reason." I could barely explain it, but there was something about it that felt wrong in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Maybe it's a relic, a piece of something much bigger. The rest of the crew trickled in, one by one. They were all quiet, eyes darting around the room as though the silence had seeped into them as much as it had into the wreckage we explored. There were no new finds, no artifacts, no technology worth salvaging, but the energy in the room felt charged, as though we were on the cusp of uncovering something that had been hiding in plain sight. Captain Sunlight, always the leader, studied the rock for a long moment, arms crossed. The captain's sharp eyes didn't miss much, and I could see the wheels turning behind them as they processed what we'd brought back. "So," Captain Sunlight said, breaking the silence, "what do you think it is?" "A relic. A strange rock from a mining expedition." "I'm not sure," I said, "but I don't think it's just any rock. There's something about it. It's too smooth. And this divot." I pointed to the indentation that seemed almost perfectly designed for a human's fingertip. "It's like it was made for a purpose." Sunlight's expression was unreadable, but I saw a glimmer of curiosity behind her calm facade. "And you think this rock could lead to something more? Something tied to the destruction of the ship?" I nodded. "Maybe. If it's from the museum ship, then it's possible it has a deeper connection to whatever happened out there. But I don't think it's a random piece of junk." I ran my hand over my helmet, shifting uncomfortably. "I think it's something someone left behind. Something important." There was a pause as everyone in the room seemed to weigh the possibility. We weren't experts in archaeology or history. We were salvage crew, just trying to get by. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this rock was tied to something far more significant than the wreckage we had been sifting through. It felt like it had a story to tell. Paint was the first to break the tension. So what now? She kicked her feet up on the table, a characteristic sign of her readiness to move on. Do we run some scans? Figure out where it came from? I stood still, studying the rock once more. My mind raced, thinking about the possibilities. Yeah, I said, looking over at the control panel. I'll run a scan. Maybe we can get a deeper analysis of its composition. We need to know what we're dealing with. The captain nodded, and with a curt wave, I got to work. I activated the ship's scanning system, directing the beams toward the rock. A few moments later, a holographic display flickered to life, showing a detailed breakdown of the rock's structure. Let's see what you're hiding, I muttered under my breath. The scan results came back in an instant, but they were strange. The rock's composition was almost entirely unidentifiable. It had elements that didn't belong to anything known in the galaxy, at least not in any natural formation. There were traces of metals and compounds that were highly unusual, and the most concerning part was that the divot, this groove, wasn't a natural occurrence. It had been carefully shaped, not by a tool, but by something far more precise, something with intent. Well, that's not what I expected, Paint said from behind me. So it's not even a space rock. More like something made. But by what? I turned to look at her, feeling an uneasy chill crawl up my spine. It's not like anything I've ever seen before. Whatever made it, they knew exactly what they were doing. And that means it's not some random object. It's part of something bigger. The realization hit me then. The ship we had boarded, the wreckage we had scavenged, and the strange rock were all linked. This wasn't just debris from a forgotten museum or an abandoned collection of artifacts. It was something much darker, and I had the feeling that we had only scratched the surface. The crew stood around me, each of them contemplating the implications of what we'd discovered. The mood in the room had shifted from curiosity to unease, as though the mystery of the rock had opened a door that none of us were prepared to walk through. We should look into the ship's records, Captain Sunlight suggested, breaking the silence. There has to be more to this. We don't salvage something like this without looking into the history behind it. I nodded. I'll get on that. Let's see if we can find anything from the museum's archives. As the crew filed out of the cargo hold, I couldn't shake the thought that this rock was the key to something much larger. I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew that the truth we were looking for wasn't going to be easy to find. The rock was just the beginning, and it was drawing us deeper into something beyond our comprehension. For now, we would follow the leads, explore the data, and try to make sense of it all. But something told me that the more we uncovered, the less we would understand. Whatever force had destroyed the museum ship, whatever history was buried in that wreckage, it wasn't over yet, and I was starting to think that we weren't just scavengers anymore. We were part of a much bigger story. But that story, it was far from finished. Unraveling the mystery. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the edge of something monumental. The rock had been only the beginning, the first breadcrumb in a trail that was leading us deeper into uncharted territory. Each passing moment added to my growing sense of urgency. I kept my eyes on the readings from the ship's archives, scrolling through them endlessly, as if the answers were hiding in plain sight. Captain Sunlight had been adamant about our next steps. No distractions, just straight to the heart of the mystery. But I knew this wasn't going to be easy. Whatever we were up against wasn't just a treasure hunt for lost relics. We had stumbled into something far more dangerous. The ship's computer logs had recorded the wreckage we scavenged, and from those logs, it became clear that the museum ship wasn't just any abandoned vessel. It had once been a thriving hub of knowledge, gathering pieces of history from all across the universe. Yet now, it lay broken, forgotten, with no explanation for its downfall. I sat in front of the holographic interface, my mind buzzing with questions. How had it all gone so wrong? And more importantly, what was the connection between the rock and the ship? Why had this insignificant object drawn such a strange reaction from Paint and me? The answers were just out of reach, like a distant star that you could never quite touch, no matter how far you reached. "Hey, you coming?" Paint's voice broke through my reverie, startling me. I turned to see her floating in the doorway of the control room, her helmet reflecting the dim blue light of the ship's interior. Her arms were folded across her chest, and there was a glint of mischief in her eyes. "Where to?" I asked, shaking myself out of my thoughts. "We're going to see what else we can dig up in the debris field," she said, her tone casual but with a note of excitement underneath. "Maybe there's something we missed, or maybe, just maybe, something worth bringing back to the captain." I nodded, unable to hide my weariness. The excitement had worn off for me. The mystery felt like a weight around my neck, pressing down with every moment that passed. But Paint was right. We couldn't let it slip by. Not now. Not when we were so close. We suited up quickly, and I followed her out into the ship's docking bay. The Frillian twins were stationed at the ship's edge, watching over the outer perimeter with their typical stoicism. I gave them a quick nod as I stepped past them, feeling the familiar hum of my exosuit powering up. Paint and I jetted out into the void together, each of us drifting silently through the debris field. The stars above us twinkled with an unearthly beauty, but there was something eerie about the way the field stretched endlessly. The broken wrecks and debris scattered across the void seemed to mirror the chaos that had occurred on that ship, the remnants of a once glorious civilization now reduced to dust. The rock was still with me, tucked securely in my pack. Even as we drifted through the empty, quiet expanse of space, I could feel the weight of it. A small, unremarkable object, and yet it had the power to unravel everything we thought we knew. We reached the outer edge of the debris field, where the wrecks had scattered farther apart. The objects around us were a strange assortment of ship parts, technology, and alien artifacts. Some were burned beyond recognition, others intact but abandoned. It was clear that something catastrophic had occurred here, yet there was still no clear answer as to what had caused it. No sign of any attacking force, no trace of a battle, just the silence of death. "Found something." Paint's voice crackled over the comms, pulling me back to the present. I turned to see her floating near what appeared to be a small storage compartment, half buried in the debris. "What is it?" I asked, a sense of curiosity creeping in. "I don't know," she replied, pulling it free from the pile. "But it's not part of the ship. This is something else." She opened the compartment with ease, and inside was a strange object, a small cube, glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. It wasn't metallic like the ship parts, nor was it like any artifact I'd ever seen. There was something both organic and synthetic about it, as if it was part of two worlds at once. "Careful," I warned, my voice low. "That thing could be more than we can handle." Paint didn't hesitate. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. "It's light," she said, sounding surprised. "But it doesn't make any sense. What would something like this be doing here? And why was it left behind?" I floated closer, narrowing my eyes as I examined the object. It felt familiar in a way, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Something about it was drawing me in, and that feeling of unease deepened. "Let's take it back," I said, my voice now steady but firm. "We'll run some scans on it. Maybe it's connected to the rock we found." We jetted back toward the ship, Paint carrying the cube with her, and me trailing closely behind. As we docked back inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just uncovered something that shouldn't be unearthed. Whatever these objects were, they were tied to the mystery of the destroyed ship, and to something far darker than we could imagine. The engine was still burning, and I could feel the heat of it, even from here, even if it was just the faintest spark. The crew had no idea what we had found, but soon they would. And when they did, they would realize that this rock, this cube, and the wreckage, they were not the end of something. They were the beginning of something much, much bigger. The silence of space, the void we had so often relied upon, now seemed full of shadows, full of secrets. And I couldn't help but wonder if we were ready for whatever lay ahead.